Nobody knew that a single book, read under the lamplight by Mustafa Kemal Atatürk in his Çankaya study, would become the philosophical blueprint for the democratic foundations of modern Turkey. In the depths of night, while the remnants of the Ottoman Empire crumbled around him, a brilliant military commander turned revolutionary leader sat hunched over his mahogany desk. The year was 1921, and Atatürk was devouring every word of Jean-Jacques Rousseau's The Social Contract. Little did he know that this 18th-century philosophical masterpiece would provide the intellectual ammunition for the most radical transformation in Turkish history, but what he discovered in those pages would shock even his closest advisors. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications beforehand. The philosopher who defied kings, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, wasn't just another Enlightenment thinker. He was a revolutionary who dared to challenge the divine right of kings in 1762. Born in Geneva, raised by a working-class father, Rousseau understood oppression in ways his aristocratic contemporaries never could. His social contract emerged from personal suffering and intellectual rebellion, making it the perfect ideological weapon for a man fighting to liberate his people from centuries of autocratic rule. When Atatürk first encountered Rousseau's opening declaration, "Man is born free and everywhere he is in chains," it wasn't merely an abstract philosophical statement. It was a battle cry that resonated through the corridors of Çankaya Palace, echoing the cries of millions of Turks yearning for liberation from both foreign occupation and internal tyranny. The shock came when he realized this French philosopher had already mapped out the theoretical framework for everything he was trying to achieve in Anatolia, the revolutionary premise. Rousseau's fundamental argument was devastatingly simple, yet explosively dangerous. Legitimate political authority could only come from the people themselves, not from God, not from tradition, not from conquest, but from the collective will of the governed. This concept struck Atatürk like lightning, illuminating the path forward for a nation struggling to define itself. But wait until you see what happened next. The Turkish leader didn't just read Rousseau, he dissected him. In his personal library, researchers later discovered pages upon pages of margin notes, red and blue underlines, and the occasional çok mühim, very important, scrawled in Atatürk's distinctive handwriting. This wasn't casual reading, this was strategic intelligence gathering. The natural man versus civilization, Rousseau's shocking diagnosis. Rousseau began his analysis with a devastating critique of civilization itself. He argued that humans in their natural state were free, equal, and essentially good. It was the development of private property, social hierarchies, and political institutions that had corrupted this natural goodness and enslaved humanity. The first person who, having enclosed a plot of land, took it into his head to say "this is mine," and found people simple enough to believe him, was the true founder of civil society. When Atatürk read these words, he saw the Ottoman Empire's feudal system laid bare. Centuries of sultans' arbitrary rule, religious hierarchy dominating civil life, and foreign powers carving up Turkish lands, all of it suddenly made sense through Rousseau's analytical lens. Here's where it gets really interesting. Unlike other Enlightenment thinkers who focused on individual rights, Rousseau was obsessed with collective freedom. This distinction would prove crucial for Atatürk's understanding of how to build a modern state that could balance Western democratic ideals with Eastern communal values. The corruption of natural goodness. Rousseau identified several key factors that had corrupted humanity's natural state. Private property, the root of inequality and conflict. 2. Social comparison, leading to vanity, jealousy, and competition. 3. Political institutions, often serving the powerful rather than the people. 4. Religious authority, interfering with rational governance. 5. Cultural traditions, sometimes perpetuating injustice. As Atatürk digested these ideas in his Ankara study, surrounded by maps of a fragmenting empire, each point resonated with devastating clarity. The old Ottoman system embodied every form of corruption Rousseau had identified, but then came the moment that changed everything. The social contact's revolution, from natural freedom to civil liberty. Rousseau's genius wasn't just in diagnosing society's problems, it was in proposing a radical solution. The social contract represented a way for humans to regain freedom, not by returning to nature, but by creating a new form of political association. Each of us puts his person and all his power in common under the supreme direction of the general will, and in our corporate capacity we receive each member as an indivisible part of the whole. This wasn't democracy as typically understood. This was something far more sophisticated and potentially more powerful, a system where individuals would surrender their natural liberty to gain civil liberty, where personal will would be subsumed into the general will. Atatürk's eyes must have blazed when he realized Rousseau had provided the theoretical framework for everything he was trying to accomplish with the Turkish national movement, the general will, democracy's secret weapon. The concept of volonté générale, general will, was Rousseau's most revolutionary contribution to political theory. It wasn't simply the will of all, the sum of individual preferences. It was something transcendent, the collective wisdom of the people when focused on the common good. Key principles of the general will, always aims at the common good, cannot be represented or delegated, differs from the will of all, expressed through direct participation, infallible when properly consulted. Don't miss this crucial detail. Atatürk would later echo these exact principles when he declared sovereignty belongs unconditionally to the people. But he was doing more than borrowing. He was adapting Rousseau's theory to Turkish realities. Sovereignty, the ultimate power. For Rousseau, sovereignty possessed four essential characteristics that would become cornerstones of Atatürk's republican vision. 1. Inalienable. The people cannot give away their sovereign power. 2. Indivisible. Sovereignty cannot be split among different institutions. 3. Absolute. Within its proper sphere, sovereign power is unlimited. 4. Infallible. The general will cannot err when properly expressed. The shocking realization hit him. These weren't just abstract principles, they were the operational guidelines for building a modern democratic state. The legislative supremacy doctrine, laws as the voice of the people. Rousseau argued that only the legislative power, the power to make laws, truly embodied popular sovereignty. Executive and judicial powers were merely servants of the legislative will, implementing and interpreting what the people had decided through their representatives. The legislative power belongs to the people and can belong to it alone. This principle would become absolutely central to Atatürk's constitutional thinking. When he established the Turkish Grand National Assembly in 1920, he wasn't just creating another parliament, he was implementing Rousseau's vision of legislative supremacy. But here's what nobody expected. Atatürk took Rousseau's theoretical framework and supercharged it with practical revolutionary energy. The TGNA wouldn't just make laws, it would simultaneously serve as the supreme command center for the War of Independence. The problem of representatives. Rousseau famously declared, "The English people believes itself free. It is gravely mistaken. It is free only during election of members of parliament. As soon as the members are elected, the people is enslaved. It is nothing." This critique of representative government posed a serious challenge. How could a large modern state implement direct democracy? Rousseau suggested that true democracy might only be possible in small city-states, but he also hinted at solutions that Atatürk would later develop. The answer came to him in a flash of insight: civil religion, the spiritual dimension, beyond traditional religion. Perhaps the most controversial aspect of Rousseau's social contract was his proposal for a civil religion, a set of spiritual beliefs designed to strengthen social bonds without interfering with individual conscience. Rousseau's civil religion included rise, belief in a powerful, intelligent, beneficent divinity, the afterlife and divine justice, the sanctity of the social contract and law, religious tolerance, with one exception, intolerant religions. You won't believe what happened when Atatürk read this section. Here was a philosophical framework that could justify his most radical reform, the separation of religious and civil authority. Rousseau wasn't attacking religion per se, he was arguing for a new kind of spirituality that would serve the Republic rather than competing with it. The Turkish application, Atatürk's implementation of laïcité, secularism, closely followed Rousseau's civil religion concept: respect for religious belief, but separation from state governance, moral foundation for civic duty and national solidarity, tolerance for diverse spiritual practices, rejection of religious interference in political decisions. The most shocking part was yet to come. Education, creating the new citizen. Rousseau's educational philosophy. Though not fully developed in the social contract, Rousseau's educational ideas, primarily from Émile, were essential to his political vision. How could the social contract work if citizens weren't properly prepared for their responsibilities? Key educational principles: role development over forced instruction, practical knowledge rather than abstract theory, moral education alongside intellectual training, critical thinking instead of blind obedience, civic responsibility as the ultimate goal. At this point, everything clicked for Atatürk. The Turkish leader realized that creating a modern republic would require nothing less than a complete educational revolution. Citizens of the Ottoman Empire had been subjects. Citizens of the Turkish Republic would need to be active participants in their own governance. The revolutionary implementation of Atatürk's educational reforms represented a direct application of Rousseauian principles. 1. Unification of education, 1924. All educational institutions under state control, breaking religious monopoly on learning. 2. Alphabet Revolution, 1928, replacing Arabic script with Latin letters, making literacy accessible to ordinary people. 3. Co-educational system, breaking gender barriers in education, reflecting Rousseau's belief in natural equality. 4. Scientific curriculum, emphasizing reason and observation over memorization and dogma. 5. Civic education, teaching constitutional principles and democratic participation. But the real shocker was still ahead. From theory to revolution, the practical application, the 1920 moment. On April 23, 1920, when Atatürk opened the Turkish Grand National Assembly, he wasn't just establishing a parliament, he was implementing Rousseau's social contract theory in real time. The assembly represented the general will of the Turkish people, exercising sovereign power in the face of both foreign occupation and internal resistance. Sovereignty belongs unconditionally to the people. These words, enshrined in Turkish constitutional law, were pure Rousseau filtered through Turkish revolutionary experience. The moment that changed history. Unlike the French Revolution, which had tried to implement Rousseau's ideas through violent upheaval, Atatürk was conducting a controlled revolution, maintaining order while transforming society from the ground up. Constitutional innovation. The 1924 Turkish constitution represented one of history's most successful applications of social contract theory. Popular sovereignty. All power derived from the people through their representative, legislative supremacy, parliament as the supreme organ of state, separation of powers, but with legislative branch clearly dominant, individual rights balanced with collective responsibilities, secular government, religion respected but separated from politics. What happened next shocked everyone. The Cultural Revolution. Beyond political change, Atatürk understood what many revolutionaries miss. Changing laws isn't enough. To implement Rousseau's vision fully, he needed to transform Turkish culture itself. The 6 arrows of Kemalism reflected key Rousseauian principles. 1. Republicanism, government by the people's representatives. 2. Nationalism, the general will expressed through national identity. 3. Populism, power belonging to the people, not elites. 4. Secularism, civil religion replacing theocratic authority. 5. Statism, strong state serving the general will. 6. Revolutionism, continuous adaptation and modernization. But the most radical transformation was still to come, the women's revolution. Although Rousseau had traditional views about women's roles, Atatürk extended the social contract principle to include full gender equality. Turkish women gained the right to vote and hold office years before their counterparts in many Western democracies. This wasn't just about rights, it was about expanding the social contract. By including women as full participants in the general will, Atatürk was taking Rousseau's principles further than the philosopher himself had imagined. The 1924 Constitution, Rousseau in action, implementing the general will. When Atatürk and his colleagues drafted the 1924 Constitution, they faced a practical challenge that had stumped political theorists for centuries: how to translate Rousseau's abstract concept of the general will into concrete institutional arrangements. Their solution was brilliant. Rundtrans, single-chamber parliament exercising supreme power, indirect presidential election by parliament, not direct popular vote, no constitutional court to override legislative decision, strong executive accountable to legislative branch, unified legal system replacing religious courts. The result shocked international observers. Turkey had created a functioning democracy based on legislative supremacy rather than American-style separation of powers or British-style parliamentary monarchy. The Caliphate decision. Perhaps no single act better demonstrated Atatürk's commitment to Rousseauian principles than the abolition of the Caliphate in 1924. By eliminating the last vestige of religious political authority, Turkey was implementing Rousseau's vision of civil religion and secular governance. The caliph's authority was a usurpation of the people's sovereignty, Atatürk argued, echoing Rousseau's critique of divine right monarchy. But his most audacious move was yet to come: the language revolution. Rousseau's linguistic nationalism, One-Age Revolution. Rousseau's linguistic nationalism, One-Age Revolution. Rousseau's linguistic nationalism, Powerswasila. In The Social Contract, Rousseau emphasized the importance of language in creating national unity and democratic participation. Citizens needed to communicate directly with each other and their government, without linguistic barriers creating artificial hierarchies. Atatürk took this insight and revolutionized Turkish society. The 1928 alphabet reform wasn't just about modernization, it was about democratizing access to knowledge and political participation. By replacing Arabic script with Latin letters, Atatürk was eliminating the educational monopoly of religious scholars and making literacy accessible to ordinary citizens. Creating the new Turkish citizen, the linguistic social contract included universal literacy as a civic duty and right, simplified spelling, making education more democratic, Turkish language purification, reducing foreign linguistic domination, women's education, expanding the social contract, rural literacy campaigns, bringing all citizens into political participation. The transformation was stunning. Within a generation, Turkey achieved one of the world's most rapid increases in literacy rates, creating the educated citizenry that Rousseau had identified as essential for democratic government. Economic dimensions of the social contract. Rousseau's economic thinking. While the social contract focused primarily on political arrangements, Rousseau's economic ideas influenced Atatürk's development strategy. Rousseau had argued that extreme inequality undermined democratic participation. Citizens couldn't exercise the general will if they were economically dependent on elites. Atatürk's economic revolution reflected these insights. Land reform, breaking up large estates to create small farmers, state economic enterprises, preventing private monopolies, industrial development, creating economic independence, women in workforce, expanding economic participation, cooperative movement, Rousseauian economic democracy. The results exceeded all expectations. The mixed economy model. Turkey's economic system represented a unique synthesis of Rousseauian social contract theory and practical development needs. Private enterprise balanced with state intervention, individual initiative harmonized with collective welfare, market mechanisms guided by general will through democratic planning, foreign investment controlled to preserve national sovereignty. This model would later influence developing nations worldwide. The broader Rousseauian influence on Atatürk. Beyond the social contract, Emil's educational legacy. Atatürk didn't just read the social contract. He absorbed Rousseau's entire philosophical system. His personal library contained multiple editions of Rousseau's Emile, the foundational text of modern progressive education. The parallels between Rousseau's educational philosophy and Atatürk's reforms were striking. Emil's natural education principles, learning through experience rather than rote memorization, practical skills alongside intellectual development, moral development through real-world engagement, individual potential realized through proper guidance. The Turkish educational revolution implemented these exact principles. When Atatürk established the new Turkish school system, he explicitly rejected the Ottoman medrese tradition of memorizing religious texts. Instead, Turkish schools would emphasize scientific method, practical learning, and critical inquiry, direct applications of Rousseau's pedagogical theories. But the most revolutionary aspect was yet to be revealed: the discourse on inequality, class and social structure. Atatürk's extensive marginalia in his copy of Rousseau's Discourse on the Origin and Basis of Inequality Among Men revealed deep engagement with questions of social justice and economic fairness. Rousseau's famous assertion that private property is the source of inequality resonated with Atatürk's observations of Ottoman society's rigid class divisions. Key Rousseauian insights that shaped Turkish social policy. 1. Artificial versus natural inequality. Rousseau distinguished between natural differences, age, strength, and artificial social hierarchies, wealth, noble birth. Atatürk's reforms systematically dismantled artificial inequalities, abolished titles and ranks from Ottoman nobility, wounded religious hierarchies in civil life, created merit-based advancement in military and civil service, established equal legal rights regardless of birth or wealth. 2. The corruption of wealth. Rousseau argued that extreme wealth concentration corrupted both rich and poor. Atatürk's economic policies reflected this concern. Rousseau argued that extreme wealth, state enterprises in key industries to prevent monopolies, cooperative movements promoting shared ownership, The social transformation was unprecedented, international reactions and diplomatic consequences. European intellectual response. When news of Turkey's radical transformation reached European capitals, intellectuals and political theorists were astonished. Here was a non-Western leader who had not only read Rousseau but had successfully implemented his most challenging ideas. French philosopher Henri Bergson wrote in 1925, "What we are witnessing in Turkey is perhaps the first successful large-scale application of Rousseauian political theory. Atatürk has achieved what the French Revolution attempted but could not complete." British political scientist Harold Laski observed, "The Turkish experiment demonstrates that Enlightenment principles can indeed flourish outside their original European context, but only when adapted by a leader who truly understands both the theory and the practical requirements of his own society." The diplomatic implications were far-reaching. The Soviet response, alternative modernization. Stalin's Soviet Union watched Turkey's Rousseauian experiment with particular interest. Here was another revolutionary state transforming a traditional society, but using democratic rather than Marxist principles. Soviet ambassador to Turkey, Semyon Aralov, reported to Moscow in 1926, "Kemal Pasha has achieved rapid modernization without class warfare or violent collectivization. His methods deserve careful study, as they may represent a competing model for backward nations seeking development." This competition of modernization models would shape 20th century development theory. American democratic theory. American political scientists were initially skeptical of Turkey's emphasis on legislative supremacy over separation of powers. However, as Turkish democracy proved stable and effective, scholars began reconsidering Rousseauian alternatives to American constitutional models. James Bryce, author of The American Commonwealth, visited Turkey in 1927 and wrote, "The Turkish system demonstrates that democratic government can take forms quite different from our American model, while remaining true to popular sovereignty principles." Comparative analysis. Other attempts at Rousseauian democracy. The French Revolutionary experience. Why did the French Revolution fail where Turkey succeeded? This question obsessed Atatürk, and his analysis revealed crucial insights about implementing Rousseauian democracy. French revolutionary problems. Violent implementation creating chaos and reaction. Factional divisions fragmenting the general will. Economic collapse, undermining popular support. Foreign intervention disrupting political development. Religious conflict polarizing society. Turkish solutions. Single national movement expressing unified general will. Economic planning, ensuring material progress. Strategic diplomacy, preventing foreign interference. Secular synthesis, respecting religion while separating it from politics. The lessons were clear but shocking. Latin American experiments. Several Latin American leaders attempted to implement Rousseauian democracy in the 19th century, with mixed results. Atatürk studied these experiences carefully, learning from both successes and failures. Simón Bolívar's Venezuela had tried to create a system based on popular sovereignty but struggled with will, regional divisions undermining national unity, caudillo politics, fragmenting the general will, economic dependence on foreign powers, educational deficits, limiting citizen participation. José Martí's Cuba had developed sophisticated theories about combining democratic participation with national independence, but implementation was interrupted by American intervention. Atatürk's synthesis drew from these experiences. Philosophical synthesis. East meets West. Islamic political theory and Rousseauian democracy. One of Atatürk's most brilliant innovations was demonstrating that Rousseauian democracy could coexist with Islamic civilization. Rather than rejecting Turkey's religious heritage, he reinterpreted it through Rousseauian lenses. Key philosophical synthesis. 1. Ijma, consensus and general will. The Islamic concept of community consensus, ijma, paralleled Rousseau's general will. Both emphasized collective wisdom over individual preference. 2. Shura, consultation and democratic participation. Islamic consultative principles provided historical precedent for popular participation in governance. 3. Ijtihad, independent reasoning and critical thinking. Islamic traditions of scholarly debate and independent interpretation aligned with Rousseauian emphasis on rational inquiry. 4. Ummah, community and social contract. The Islamic concept of community responsibility resonated with Rousseau's emphasis on collective obligations. This synthesis shocked both traditional Muslims and secular Europeans. Confucian influences and collective responsibility. Atatürk's reading extended beyond Western philosophy to include Confucian texts on governance and social harmony.
The Chinese emphasis on collective responsibility and educated leadership complemented Rousseauian themes. Confucian principles that reinforced Rousseauian ideas, mandate of heaven as popular legitimacy, educated bureaucracy serving the general good, social harmony balancing individual and collective needs, moral leadership setting examples for citizens, cultural continuity within political transformation, the legacy inspiring global democratic movements, post-colonial applications. Turkish success in implementing Rousseauian democracy inspired independence leaders across Asia and Africa. The Turkish model became shorthand for achieving modernization without Western domination. Jawaharlal Nehru wrote in 1929, "Turkey under Kemal has shown that an Eastern nation can adopt Western democratic forms while maintaining its own cultural identity. This provides hope for all colonized peoples seeking both independence and modernity." Kwame Nkrumah studied Turkish reforms while planning Ghana's independence. Atatürk demonstrated that the social contract can work in non-European contexts when adapted to local conditions and implemented by leaders who understand both democracy and their own people. Gamal Abdel Nasser explicitly modeled Egyptian reforms on Turkish precedents. The Turkish Revolution proves that Arab nations can achieve rapid development through democratic planning and popular participation. The influence spread across continents. Contemporary relevance. 21st century democracy. Today's democratic challenges echo those that Rousseau identified and Atatürk addressed. Growing inequality, citizen alienation, elite capture, cultural polarization, and questions of legitimate authority. Modern applications of the Rousseau-Atatürk synthesis. 1. Digital democracy. Technology enabling more direct citizen participation in governance. 2. Participatory budgeting. Communities directly deciding spending priorities. 3. Constitutional conventions, citizens' assemblies drafting fundamental laws. 4. Education for citizenship, schools emphasizing civic engagement over test scores. 5. Cultural integration, balancing diversity with shared democratic values. The relevance is more urgent than ever. Critical assessments and ongoing debates. Scholarly interpretations. Modern political scientists continue debating the success and limitations of Turkey's Rousseauian experiment. Supporters argue, rapid democratization achieved without violent upheaval. Cultural synthesis, proving compatibility of Eastern and Western values. Educational transformation, creating informed citizenry. Economic development, demonstrating democratic efficiency. International influence inspiring other democratization movements. Critics contend, elite-led change rather than grassroots democracy. Cultural suppression of minority traditions, centralized authority limiting local autonomy, secular imposition, restricting religious expression, single-party dominance, undermining pluralistic competition. The debate continues to shape democratic theory, unresolved tensions. Neither Rousseau nor Atatürk fully resolved fundamental tensions in democratic theory. Individual rights versus collective will. How far can the general will override individual preferences? Cultural unity versus diversity. Can democratic participation coexist with cultural pluralism? Elite leadership versus diversity. Can democratic participation coexist with cultural pluralism? Popular control. Who should guide the general will, experts or ordinary citizens? National sovereignty versus global integration. How can democracies maintain autonomy in an interconnected world? Traditional values versus modern progress. What aspects of inherited culture should be preserved or transformed? These questions remain central to contemporary democratic practice. Conclusion. The book that built a nation. When Mustafa Kemal Atatürk closed Rousseau's social contract for the final time, he had absorbed more than just political theory. He had discovered a blueprint for national transformation. The French philosopher's insights about popular sovereignty, the general will, civil religion and democratic education became the intellectual foundation for one of history's most successful democratization efforts. The transformation was complete, but the influence was just beginning. Turkey's successful implementation of Rousseauian principles demonstrated that Enlightenment ideals could flourish outside their original European context. From the Turkish Grand National Assembly to the Alphabet Revolution, from women's suffrage to secular education, every major Kemalist reform reflected deep engagement with Rousseau's political philosophy. But perhaps most importantly, Atatürk proved that books really can change the world. In the hands of a visionary leader, Rousseau's theoretical insights became the practical tools for building a modern democratic state. The social contract wasn't just a philosophical concept, it was a revolutionary program waiting to be implemented. The genius of Atatürk's approach lay not in blind imitation, but in creative adaptation. He understood that Rousseau's principles needed to be filtered through Turkish culture, Islamic civilization, and the practical requirements of nation building. The result was neither purely Western nor purely Eastern, but something new, a democratic synthesis that respected both universal human aspirations and particular cultural traditions. The global impact cannot be overstated. From India to Ghana, from Egypt to Indonesia, leaders of emerging nations studied the Turkish model as proof that democracy and modernization were possible without surrendering national identity or cultural authenticity. The Rousseau-Atatürk synthesis became a template for what political scientists now call indigenous democratization. Today, as established democracies face new challenges and emerging nations seek sustainable development models, the story of how one leader used an 18th century book to create a 20th century republic remains as relevant as ever. Questions about the general will, civil religion, educational democracy, and cultural integration continue to shape political debate worldwide. The revolution continues, in libraries and universities, in parliaments and classrooms, in the minds of citizens everywhere. Rousseau's ideas live on, and somewhere perhaps, another young leader is discovering in those same pages the intellectual weapons needed to transform their own society. The social contract remains unfinished business, a democratic promise that each generation must fulfill anew. The book that shaped a nation continues to shape the world. The ultimate lesson of Atatürk's engagement with Rousseau is that great ideas transcend their original contexts when they address fundamental human needs, the need for freedom, dignity, participation, and belonging. These needs are universal, even if their expression must be culturally specific. Rousseau provided the philosophical framework. Atatürk supplied the practical wisdom and revolutionary courage needed to transform theory into reality. As democracies around the world grapple with populism, inequality, technological disruption, and cultural conflict, the Rousseau-Atatürk synthesis offers both inspiration and practical guidance. It reminds us that democracy is not a fixed system, but a continuous process of collective learning and adaptation. The general will must be constantly renewed, the social contract periodically renegotiated, and civic education never-ending. The story of one book's journey from Geneva to Ankara, from philosophical speculation to revolutionary practice, from one man's vision to a nation's destiny, demonstrates the enduring power of ideas to transform human societies. In our age of rapid change and global uncertainty, that lesson has never been more important.